Hello, it's Paul Roy from Profitable Practice Pro, and I'm here today with a very, very interesting individual by the name of Paul Snell. And Paul is a business coach, team coach, creative creator of businesses, and we became friends, what, 2, 3 years ago through the LinkedIn family. And it's just been a friendship that I cherish. So, Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Whenever I see two Pauls, I think of a double act. So I think we're on a good start today.
Well, that's it. Long as they're not seeing double, so that we're good. Um, if I could take a minute just to briefly introduce you, then we'll get started in. And the audience don't want to hear me talking; they're here to listen to you. But my friend Paul Snell has been in business coaching and consulting, essentially starting with, and even before he started his own business 20 years ago, kite coaching. Correct?
Correct.
And then, through that process, Paul developed a company called DNA Neurodynamics. And it's about understanding our minds and the soft skills and why we think and do what we do. And Paul will be sharing more about that later. And Paul is also a podcast co host with Lindsay Burden in the US, or in the US, pardon me, the UK. My apologies for that. Um, and they called Changing the Norm. And when you get to know Paul here a little better in the next couple of minutes, you'll understand why changing the norm is a fit. Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. What an introduction, I have to say. And I'm honored and privileged to be here. And as you said before, we jumped on live. You and I could talk for hours. So we do need to be very careful with that. But I'm so pleased to be here and looking forward to it.
Well, you can tell by the smile on my face, I'm excited about having you and excited for the audience who's going to have an opportunity to get to know you better. And Paul, you're obviously passionate about what goes on below the surface. You wouldn't have created DNA if that wasn't a primary thing for you and understanding the soft skills and communications. So, below the surface minds, your desire to help them become happier and healthier, more productive. And what led you to get into this profession?
Well, it's a little bit interesting. I was going to say it's really interesting. May not be to lots of people, but it is. My career pre-coaching and behavioral science was in the world of movies and visual effects, and from the technology angle in that. So, sadly, not the clever people that do all the wonderful creation and designs and the things you see on the movies, but in the technology background. But what became really evident over the years is that industry is incredibly pressured. It's very, very stressful. And you can imagine, can't you, if you're Disney and you have a Marvel film that's coming out and you spent 300 million on making that film work, there is no delays, right? You're not allowed to delay. So if you're a visual effects artist who happens to be working on one of these films and you have more work than you can fit in the hours, you simply do more hours. Right. And so what it ended up being, I would see on a regular basis people burn out. I would see people not understanding how to navigate this stuff and still come out the other side smiling. Right. So it became for me a passion to see people really enjoy the thing they're incredibly talented at. Now, that evolved, as you quite rightly pointed out, that evolved. My journey with psychometrics, my journey with behavioral science, it became very clear to me how much we do and use our non-conscious brain, right? In fact, 95% of every decision we make every day is made non-consciously. And the more we can become aware of why and how that happens, in other words, why do we have the beliefs, the feelings, the attitudes that sit in that non-conscious brain, how we use that, the self-awareness that comes from that, the blind spots that come from that, how we use that can make a huge difference to how we navigate life and business.
Well, thank you for sharing that because you obviously saw the need to take the relief from these people who are just in a pressure cooker situation and how many team members and middle managers and people in the businesses that they're involved in feel this pressure that they need to perform, and sometimes against what goes on inside of here or inside of here. And you've heard me say it before, the mind and the heart are only a foot apart physically, but can sometimes be continents apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's dig into the partnership dynamics. It is the Partnership Advantage podcast, after all. And you've obviously worked with leaders with their teams and business partners. And do you have some examples of insights of how people have been able to transform their outlook with respect to partnerships and how it changed?
It is a very enlightening process. Because so much of what we do we're unaware of. This is almost a paradox I'm saying here, because there's so much of what we do and how we think and the actions we take we're unaware of, and because we're unaware of the things we're unaware of, if that makes some sense, then all of a sudden, the mechanical process of ensuring that you make the best possible decision or lead in the best possible way is challenged, because way too much of that you're unaware of, right? The blind spots you have. And so for some great examples in some of the work we've done, I can give you, for example, here's a good one. We had a young chap who was excelling in his role. He was a salesman, he was outstanding, and he was asked to become a sales manager. That was the next step for someone that's successful. And he got into the sales manager's role and he absolutely spiraled. There was no success. He was devastated. When we spent time looking at this non-conscious thing, we spend our lives, by the way, we spend our lives building up the non-conscious brain with all the experiences that we believed, or the brain believes to be true, and that we hold in that non-conscious space. And that the brain's an amazing thing, but it's incredibly lazy. So the first place it goes is the non-conscious, right? It goes, I don't want all that effort to try and process some brain calories here. I'm going to go to the non-conscious. And it picks stuff up from there. And this young lad, what happened was, when he was at school, he was told that he would get nowhere. He would get nowhere in his career if he spent time on the creative arts. That wasn't going to be something that could help him in his career. And so whenever we would look at his assessment and understand some of this non-conscious stuff, what we saw was he absolutely believed that he was creative, but his non-conscious brain was saying, we're not allowed to be creative. And so he was asked to be in a role as a sales manager where creativity was key. How do you develop a team? How do you lead a team? And how do you create the dynamic and the culture for a successful team? That's a creative role, right? But if your non-conscious is saying to you, we can't do creativity, creativity doesn't feature. We were told not to do that, and that becomes a de facto standard in a non-conscious level, there would be what we call dissonance. And it's like running through treacle, Paul. It's not easy and ultimately really messy.
So is this, because we're diving in a little deep here because of what's in the subconscious and what's in the conscious. So where, when we have that, and I'm a Bob Proctor fan, and he's got, that our what we feed, what we allow to feed our subconscious will actually lead us, even though we believe that we built this barrier that wasn't
Correct.
there.
Correct.
And keep going,
I just, when I look through the examples of the work we've done, what becomes really clear is how this type of assessment, and we assess how your implicit thoughts work with the explicit thoughts. Implicit is your non-conscious, explicit is what you believe to be true in your rational mind, your conscious mind. The more work we do in that, the more we realize how much society impacts the way people think we should behave to be accepted. And so we see this in so many dynamics within an organization, that people will decide to behave the way they think they need to behave to be successful, when the reality is often the opposite. And so for situations where you have teams, where you have leaders, particularly leaders, right, They can be impacted so significantly about the things they can't see, the blind spots that we're unaware of, right? So the big buzzword of self-awareness is so true, but to be very practical about that, if we miss the reality for the things we think we should be, we often make the mistakes that we don't need to make.
So that's where the being consciously aware of what our subconscious or what we would respond to quickly
Yeah.
based on our conditioning, which may not be, as you would say, the implicit and not the explicit.
Yeah. And we have to be clear here. It's not a question of what's right, wrong, or indifferent. What it is, it's there. We all have it. We all have this conditioning that we've accumulated over a lifetime. And that colors the way we make decisions. And if 95% of those are made non-consciously on a daily basis, it would be really good to start being more aware of those.
It's funny, you just led me to bring up a topic about dealing with the unconscious or the subconscious. And we've all heard this example, but how many times have you driven home from the office and pulled in your driveway and have no idea or
Exactly.
recollection how you got there?
Exactly. And in fact, I'm going to be very quick, Paul, because I'm conscious of time
Yes.
and I could talk for hours. But let me give you a prime example of how non-consciously the public or we all behave in the UK, in the London Underground in the UK, in the tube system
Yeah.
in the UK. About 20 years ago, it had the worst feedback of any service in the UK. It was dreadful. People complained. It was dreadful. They installed some electronic signs on each platform saying how long trains were going to be between the trains, the time it took for the next train to arrive. And it could vary. There could be some delays. And it transformed overnight the feedback on the quality of the tube service without a single train changing how quick it came between each train. No change to the service. The reason is when we can see we have a choice, we are comfortable. So if you can see the train's going to be 4 minutes late, you can go, well, I might wait for the train, or I'll go up to the surface and catch a bus. If you don't see that information, you're challenged with what you should do. Do you stay? Do you go? You don't know. It's difficult. And so you can see how we don't think about that, by the way. There was no conscious thought and there was no change in the time it took for trains to arrive. It was simply putting something in place that changed how we thought non-consciously. And that gave us a choice.
So would that be considered a way of helping manage expectations?
Oh, yeah.
Because once it said it would be in 4 minutes, oh, it arrived in 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Oh, we
Yeah.
delivered.
It's exactly that. And that's why it's a prime example of we're not talking about reprogramming here. We're not talking about any complex psychology beneath the surface. What we're saying is that the minute when you remove the blind spot that you have, you can then decide how you manage that. For some people, the blind spot's okay. Right? For some people, it's, I can't believe I've now seen that. Now that I'm aware of it, I can adapt my behavior. That's how
Well,
it works.
that was going to lead to the next question because, having been a recipient and having taken your DNA program that we're going to talk about here in a minute, and you talked about these blind spots, and there were things that came up in terms of my decision making or thought processes that actually went, oh, how is it? I can't believe that
Yeah.
this comes into my decision making process. Well,
Mm.
now that I know it, I can adjust and perhaps respond with more intention and understanding when you do these assessments. And I like to use the term
Mm.
assessment. I don't know what you prefer to call it.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I hate to say personality profiling or whatever. It's an assessment of who we are,
Yeah.
and that there are no wrong answers.
No, it's just who you are. Right. I
Yeah,
can give you a prime example, Paul.
please.
We had a client who was running a very high-tech biotech company He was a PhD doctor in bioscience. And we went through the assessment to review the decision-making progress he did, as well as his team. They were a small organization. They were embryonic, so they needed to be right. They didn't have the time and space to be too wrong, right? And what we found out was, and this came through via the assessment, because he had a PhD, he didn't value anyone's opinion if they didn't have a PhD. That was a non-conscious assessment. And he turned around and said, Paul, I cannot believe I have just realized that's happened. In the 90 minutes we were together, he said, I can't believe it. He said, I can't tell you how many opportunities I've missed because I've simply dismissed anyone who didn't have a PhD. I dismissed their opinion. And he said, I have now realized where I've gone wrong. That's a fundamental shift in thinking.
And I'm glad you brought that up because, I mean, as important as education is and the knowledge is, it helps us in our decision-making processes, that when we stop and think about that, we go, wow, I have all this knowledge, technical knowledge here, but it shut down my ability to listen. And then the communication barriers break down.
They do. And the decision process is infected. It's a very linear process. And like I said, it's not about right or wrong. And like you said, it's not about right or wrong. You're not wrong in any way. It's simply who you are and how that impacts you and your decision-making, communication, your leadership. All of that is colored by these non-conscious attitudes, beliefs, and feelings that we have.
So, having read the book Blink, I'm not if and it's amazing. What is it that 90 or 95% of your decisions that come instantly are correct, and as soon as we stop, and the reasoning mind jumps in, and then we go, nah, couldn't be. It might affect, but that whole what's deeply embedded in us that comes out, or as we see things, is often correct.
It is. In fact, I would argue it's always correct. But
Okay.
the challenge is the subsequent behavior. So if you were the PhD researcher and you go, okay, so I didn't realize I had a belief that anyone who didn't have a PhD wasn't worthy of my attention when they had an idea. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not a wrong thing. Everyone knows a PhD level education is significant. The problem isn't the wrongness. The problem is the subsequent decision making. So for him, in his case, the decision not to take on board what people said who didn't have a PhD led to him missing opportunities. That's the decision consequence of that blind spot.
And it's funny. I've just written my next newsletter for the accounting industry, and you talked about opportunities, but opportunities do have an expiration date.
Oh, yes.
And, they don't live there inevitably if we're unable to make a decision on the opportunity.
And isn't it fascinating, though, that you're right about an expiration date, and how disappointing would it be if, for whatever reason, a simple shift in how we think would have not come about to take advantage of that opportunity? Because let me tell you, and you've experienced it, Paul, none of this is some secret mystical stuff. This is simply self-awareness. And people will say to me, self-awareness, Paul, that's all a bit sort of woo-woo. It's not. It's fundamental when you understand who you are and how you function and how you think, especially in how you think in that 95% of non-conscious action and decision. You maximize on every opportunity you have, every opportunity to develop your business, to lead a team, to be the very best version of yourself.
So, for example, in a business partnership, and that being empathetic or being understanding isn't your strong suit.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you engage with somebody who may be empathetic and is making decisions to try to please you, but it isn't the best decision for the group or the company or the team?
You know, leadership's a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, you've given a prime example. Let me try and unpack a bit here.
Yeah.
How often do we see someone, usually a leader, who says that person in my team is the best person for me to confide in, to refer to delegate to? And if you ask them why, they say because they feel you feel good about them. Something
Yeah.
feels right. What they really mean is one of the character aspects of that person, usually confidence, by the way. We are very attracted to confidence, not ego. We'll come on to that, but confidence.
Yes.
And so what tends to happen is the leader goes, I like the confidence in that person. And then every single aspect of work, of decision, of process is referred to that person just because they feel they like them because of their confidence. They don't logically process that. That's
Right.
non-conscious. But can you imagine if you find yourself as a leader liking someone non-consciously because of their confidence, right? You just feel like you like them.
Yeah.
And therefore you go, well, they must be competent, mustn't they?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
I've lost count of the number of business owners I've worked with who are struggling to keep good people.
Mm,
And they would tell me, "Well, I'm a good judge of character." Right? And you go, "Well, it's not showing up on the retention form."
yeah,
Maybe it's time you do an assessment. Maybe it's time you change the way that that
yeah,
it's not a reflection of your this individual isn't a reflection of your thoughts. And to your point, which I hadn't thought about, and thank you for shining a light on it, is that we believe or trust them and we have confidence in them,
yeah.
even though they may not have the ability.
Correct. That's how driven we are. That's how malleable we are. We need to be very, very aware of things that the reality is very different, right? We
Yeah,
can we can feel great about the confidence in someone, but we need to be careful we don't allow that to affect the competence perspective,
yeah.
right? That's a leadership challenge. I see it all the time.
You brought up an interesting word that I pay attention to. My wife's a therapist, and she, teaches a class on taming the egoic mind and how our egos can be a train wreck
Yeah.
in difficult situations. Yep. I'm certain you see it
Oh
in
yeah.
your own practice from time to time. And is that ego, um, when you talked about having the confidence in somebody, and the ego won't let you move off of that, much like you talked about with the gentleman with the PhD, who, if you didn't have one, you weren't at my level.
Yeah. Every
Henry
person,
Ford and Edison and all
we
of these people didn't have PhDs or college degrees. They had a burning desire to
yes,
build something.
but the ego sits in everyone. It's just a
Okay.
question of where it sits in everyone. We all have, if you go back, and again, be careful not to talk forever here, Paul, but if we go back to very, very early evolution days of the human species, it was all about self. I needed to
Okay.
survive. I needed to find food. I needed to be warm. And even any baby up to the age of 2, it's all about self. I want to be fed. I want to be held. I want to be warm. Ego is inherent. The challenge is how it manifests. So you describe the PhD scenario where the manifestation was, I don't care, or I don't value other people's opinions if they don't have a PhD. That's a manifestation.
Yep.
And that's where, when we become more self aware, we can recognize or begin to recognize where ego may be a challenge, where thinking patterns may be a challenge. I'm choosing my words carefully here because, as I said before, this is not black or white or yes or no or correct or
Yeah.
false. It's just who we are. And it's being self aware enough to understand that.
I was awareness before it came out of your mouth, what was on my mind. Wow. Time is clicking away here, Paul.
Yes, it is.
Um, and as we talked about, we could go on forever. So I know down the line we'll have you back and perhaps next spring for another visit. And before I ask you to share with the audience how they get a hold of you and which I'll put in the comment section below the link. My podcast isn't advanced to the level yet where Paul Snell's is, where he's on Spotify and all these other major channels with the Changing the Norm podcast. But it's in doing that, I've lost my train of thought. So why don't you share a bit about DNA and how they can get a hold of you, and then I'll put your contact information in the comment section so they can reach out to you.
I'd love to. So we created DNA Neuroanalytics. We created them. We created the organization because we focus on the core skills that myself and my business partner has, which is in coaching, mental health. We underpin that with the behavioral science, the neuroscience that we've been discussing, right? That's the key message. We combine the two to get an outcome for our clients. If you want to know more about that, you can go to dnaneuroanalytics.com. You can pick up information there. If you want to talk to me, and I'm always happy to talk, as you can probably tell from a non-stop on the last 25 minutes, get me on LinkedIn. Paul Snell on LinkedIn. It's DNA Neuroanalytics. You can't miss me. I'm fairly evident, glasses, face, you can't miss it. And I would love to chat. We can jump on a call and have a chat. Always happy to chat.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'll be putting that in the comments section below. And the thought did come back to me, and that to the audience that thinks that the latest AI hack or the latest technology is your answer, it isn't.
No.
The shift comes from within us, and then what tools will help us with who we are inside, that we can leverage those tools. But those tools won't solve our inherent problems.
Every single
We've got to
time.
deal with them.
Every single time, 100%.
Yeah. Paul, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, Paul's contact information will be in the comment section on the LinkedIn post within a few minutes. Have a wonderful day. On behalf
Thanks.
of Paul Snell and myself, have a great day.